Hello, Igniting Community. I'm Doris Forrester, and I'm back with another global population and gender talk. Today's talk is coming from my classroom, and this is the place where I get to explore a lot of really interesting topics and issues with my students. And one of the topics that is near and dear to my heart is human trafficking. And this started for me when I was in university. There was a bar close to where I grew up, and the owner of that bar was luring women from Eastern Europe. And during this time, it was just after the fall of the USSR and the collapse of the communist bloc. And a lot of the economies of those countries were very weak and starting to rebuild. And a lot of the people that lived in those countries were seeking opportunities elsewhere. So this gentleman advertised for women to come and work in his bar. And once they got there, he confiscated their passports. And through coercion, they were in the sex trade. And one courageous victim, and that's usually what it is, reported it to the authorities. And a lot of women were saved. And then I found out that this gentleman was freed from jail and is a major developer in my city. So this is something that I am on high alert when I read about these cases, and I follow up on them. And I teach this every time I have a senior level geography course, because I think it's important for students to realize the magnitude, the complexity of this issue, and just how close these cases are to where we live. And so I don't want them falling victim to it, but also if they see anything that's not right, maybe they'll go and report. I don't know. I just think it's important. So I always start my lessons with these two pictures. I haven't found any photos that are more powerful than these two. I think until you visualize how people are becoming commodities for these traffickers, it doesn't resonate with people until you can make that connection, and I think these two visuals really do that. So this is human trafficking is illegal, in every country in the world, but yet it's practiced everywhere. It's the third largest criminal enterprise after drugs and guns, and it is reported to be the fastest growing criminal activity. And you have to think about it. It's so much easier to coerce somebody not to say anything to the police than to conceal your drugs and your guns. It's also more lucrative to make money continually from a person than it is to make money from drugs and guns. So I can see at some point it's going to be the number one activity. So this violates a lot of the articles from the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And this has been, I think the UN has been following this probably as long as I've been teaching about it, maybe a little bit longer. And they produce a report every year, and they're looking at ways to, catch people, persecute, help the victims, get countries on board. And it is like a positive thing that the United Nations is doing. And so when you look at Article 1, everybody's born free and equal, and we should be treating people right, each other better, and human trafficking definitely violates that one. Article 4, no one should be held in slavery or servitude, and it's prohibited. So that it's just there. We don't really need another article, but Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruel, inhumane, or degrading treatment or punishment, and human trafficking violates this on so many levels. So basically, human trafficking follows three things, and I just don't know, I'll put myself right there. It's the act, the means, and the purpose. And so if they have one of these things together, they are human trafficking. So it's the way they're recruited, the transportation of people, the transferring, the receiving, the violence as a means, right? To how do you get people to comply? Threatening their family, coercing them, fraud, abduction. Sometimes it's drugs. They give them drugs, rape, abuse of power. And the purpose is usually for forced labor. Most trafficked victims are being forced to work, and their money being given to whoever's trafficking them. And sexual exploitation then is the second largest, but most of it is forced labor. So human trafficking is defined by the United Nations as the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people through force, fraud, or deception. And a lot of it is fraud and deception. Women and men apply for jobs, and then when they get to those jobs, it's another story, and they are held in slavery, and they don't get paid, and their passports are confiscated, and they're stuck. Okay, and the aim is to exploit them for profit. men, women, and children. The majority of victims are women, so that's why I wanted to do this for igniting community. They're from all ages, all backgrounds. They can be victims of this crime. Okay, and we know it occurs in every region. The traffickers often use, like I said, violence and fraudulent employment agencies to lure them in and then trick them and coerce the victims. So a lot of, like early on, human trafficking was associated with actually taking somebody and crossing an international border. And what we're finding is that that's happening, but more times than not, people are being trafficked within their own borders, within their own country, sometimes, usually, a lot of times within their own city. A lot of young girls in high school are being victims of sexual exploitation, and they're going home every night, and then they're going with these men that have groomed them and have coerced them into this life. So it is modern slavery, and I think that's what we should really be calling it. Human trafficking doesn't have the same imagery, I think, than modern day slavery. It is the severe exploitation of other people for personal or commercial gain. People are considered the property of others. They can be held against their will from the time of their capture, or sometimes they're purchased at birth, or sometimes they're born to somebody that is being held in slavery. And many times, they're the people making our clothes. They're the people that are working in the restaurants. They're the nannies, the cooks, the cleaners. They're working in various factories. And it's not the sex trade workers that many people associate human trafficking with. They are deprived of their right to leave. They are deprived of refusal of unsafe work or any kind of work, and they are deprived of demanding wages, and they don't get them very often. If they're working for a business owner, he just doesn't pay them, and if they're working somewhere where they're getting paid, their money then is gone to whoever has trafficked them. Here are different forms. Human trafficking occurs in many different forms. The main ones, like I said, are forced prostitution and forced labor. For children, it's forced marriage, forced child begging, and then the selling of the baby sometimes is for forced labor when they get older, but sometimes it's even to purchase them to marry their male child. It's a lot of girls that are victims of this. And organ theft is something that's new that's happening, and it's happening in a lot of countries where you have somebody, you take the viable organs and you sell them on the black market. All right, and here I just wanted to point out a couple things, just the money, and I'm not sure how they calculate this, but they're saying that it is a $150 billion industry where most of the money is coming from sexual exploitation, so 99 billion of that. But then if you look at the pie graph at the top, you can see that 68% of the victims, it's forced labor, but the money is coming from the 22% of sexual exploitation. And you can see that, like, globally, each region has cases of victims, how much money, and how much money per victim. Okay, so looking at some global trends, it is reported or estimated, I would say, because I think this number is too low, 40.3 million victims of human trafficking exist in the world today. And like I said, I think that number is considerably higher. It's very difficult to count because a lot of this goes unreported. But out of that 40.3 million, 24.9 are exploited for labor, 15.4 into forced marriage, and the rate of human trafficking is for every 1,000 people on Earth. It is estimated that 5.4 people are victims of modern day slavery. If we look at it by gender, 71% are female and 29 are males. So the majority of victims are females. It's easier to coerce. It's easier to traffic vulnerable women, especially if they're with their children, especially if they're fleeing some kind of violence or war. It's very, very easy. And when you break it down even more, we're looking at 82% of victims being either women or children, and very often women will be with their children, and that's why, when there's conflict like what's going on in the Ukraine or Syria, women are really at risk because they will do what they need to do to protect their children, but then their children also could become victims of this. And so the young girls that are taken into the sex trade, what's happening to them is that they're being given, they call it the cow drug, but it's just a hormone that they would take that makes them put on fat and makes them look older, so that they are fooling the customers that come into the brothels that these are not young girls, and really they're 12, 11 sometimes. And Bangladesh is not the only country that does this. It happens in many brothels around the world. And so, these children are robbed of so much from such a young age. When we look at it by industry, I've already shown some stats, but this is a little bit different in the way they collected these. So 64% are forced labor, 19% are for sexual exploitation. It's a little bit lower than what was said from the other site. And debt bondage is a big part of the forced labor, where they apply for a job. The employer says, okay, come, we're going to pay for your plane ticket, your immigration papers, any fees that you have. We're going to set you up in an apartment. And then once they get their passports are confiscated, and they're told that they have to repay the debt with interest, and then it takes like almost the entire lifetime to pay that back. So they are indebted to the employer forever, it seems like. And a new report is 16% are forced labor imposed by state authorities. So that means the government. And there's some reports out of North Korea that people are being forced to go to China to work in some of the factories, and then they go back to North Korea, and the money is taken from them. When we look at it by age, the majority of victims are over the age of 18, 75%, 25% are under the age. And when you look at that 25% of children, 37% are forced marriage, and 21% are that exploitation, sexual exploitation, and that's where that hormone comes in. And when you look at it globally, you can see the areas of the world that are exploiting children for human trafficking. So it's all over the world. When we look at victims by type of exploitation, what you'll notice in the richer countries, it's sexual exploitation, and in poor countries, it's more forced labor. And I think that's for a couple of reasons. One is the sex trade is not as lucrative in those countries because people don't have the money, and it's more profitable to have people working for free so that you can make money and keep it than having women sell their bodies for either very little or not at all. Okay, and that just is without the map, you can see the areas. And again, the Americas is sexual. And then when you look to Africa, it's more of the forced labor. And then these countries, Europe, Central Asia, it's more of a balance. Okay. And here we look at the victims within their own borders. And each region, we can see most of the regions having an increase into 2018, that it's within their own country. So if you look at Western and Southern Europe, Central and Southern Eastern Europe, South Asia, and North America, the rich countries, it's being done within the borders. And then in the poor countries, it's not as much. So they're being taken and sent to other countries, and most of those are richer countries. What I think, though, is because of the pandemic and travel restrictions, I think this graph would look much different, and we'd see in probably every single region most of the trafficking happening within the region. Okay, and the map at the bottom, map 7, is showing shares of detected victims by type of trafficking flow by subregions in 2018. Okay, so then we have the pink is within, and then we have across subregions and then across regions. So you can see that a lot of it's within. And there's just some flows. And this becomes the issue of how to stop it, because the flows are just so all over the place. And where do you go to start implementing a policy to stop it? So we have transregional flows. We have transregional flows less than 5% of detected victims. And then we have victims repatriated from destination countries. And this is all out of the United Nations. So the stages are recruitment, transportation, and destination. So where are they being recruited from? Where are they being transported? And what is their final destination? And those are the stages. And I'm going to stop my talk there. I'm going to come back and look at this a little bit more, and then look at what is the world doing about it, and how do we protect each other. But a big part of it is, it's called the 3 Ps, which is prevention, protection, and persecution. So I will come back to address those. So I'm going to say bye for now. Ciao.